going to record this to the cloud. It looks like we're going. That's great. So brilliant. So I'm going to hand over now to Guannan, and she's going to talk us through just her experiences in research. So Guannan, when you're ready, please.
Yeah, sure. I'm just wondering how I can share my screen. I think I don't have the button. I think to give me access.
Yeah, screen. There you go. I've given you sharing rights there. Try to share a screen now. You should have access to it.
Yes, I do. Okay.
Well, I just put myself on mute in case I have to deal with any situations like Marina trying to join or anyone else joining late. So
okay, sure. Okay. So hi everyone. My name is Guannan. So Giles basically invited me to talk more about user research. So I will focus on user research part for some introduction part, but you are welcome to ask any questions afterwards. So let's make it casual. So if you have any question, feel free to interrupt me at any time and just let me know if anything is not clear or you need more explanation for anything. So I'll start from the introduction part, just like a final check. Can you see my slide and can you hear me well? Is everything working?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so about me, so this is basically just from a LinkedIn profile, so it's not so friendly for a presentation, but anyway, so in general, I started my career in user research and actually jumped around quite a lot, so in all related fields, so from user research to UX design and then to UI design, and also work as a product manager for a couple of years, and also manage a couple of product team and also design team. And these are some brands I have worked with, but in general, like my experience, I have some experience working with pretty big brands like Samsung or HP, working as user researcher and also UX designer for Samsung. And then I also, for the recent years, the past 5 years, I have mostly been working with startups. So I've been helping 2 startups to basically build their product from scratch. So joining as a first designer, building from zero, from proof of concept to basically pretty mature product. So for one of the first startup I worked with, it's an education technology company. So I joined them as first designer, and right now the product is serving more than 2,000 schools. I'm right now the head of UX in a UAE-based company called Aleph Education. It's the first logo here. Basically, we work with government here to do remote learning, digital learning, all sorts of things. We are a company of around 500 people at the moment. So I'm heading a team of around 10 people with a function of UI design, UX research, and also product analytics. And also I have been working with a company called Career Foundry for more than a year. So basically have been teaching students UX skills online with this company. Have taught around 30 students, and mostly it's a 5 to 10 months course on UX. 5 months if you do it full-time and 10 months if you do it part-time. I mostly review their homework and having weekly calls with them like this and to answer their questions and also discuss further about all the assignments they have been doing. Yeah, so that's about my experience. I worked in also Denmark, China, and UAE. Okay, it's just some background information. So you know what kind of questions might be relevant for me to answer. If you have any question, feel free to just let me know anytime. Otherwise, I'll just proceed. So for next part, I'm going to go into UX research part. So I actually have quite a big passion for this topic, although I'm not, that's not my main domain anymore, but that's all my studies were about, both my bachelor and my master. And also that's where I started my career because that's what I was mostly interested in. I found human beings quite fascinating. I found that huge passion in conducting research and trying to figure out reasons. So in this call, I'm mostly I'm thinking about basically giving a overview, basically short introduction about the absolutely most important things we all need to know about user research. And then also adding some tips and some questions, basically like my students found most helpful or like they got them like most confused about. So I'm mostly talking about the 3 parts. So some general overview about why we do user research, how it fits in the UX circle, and the methodology part, the methods around it, and so an overview, and also I'm picking one, the most important method, and go a little deeper into that, and talk about more techniques. And then the deliverables. So after you conduct user research, how do you communicate what you found, and what are the common ways to deliver a result? So for the first part, so why do we do user research? So I think like just from how this whole thing started, I would say like, I really like how the terminology they're using here is basically saying it's a philosophy. So even without evidence, we're saying we believe by talking to users, by getting close to users, we deliver better product. So that's where it started before we even have evidence to say that the whole user-centered design, user-driven design start from more philosophy. So we believe that's the right way to build product. We believe by involving users, it gets us to better product. And of course, over the years, a lot of companies have provided a lot of data to prove that better UX is better business. For example, if you just Google this sentence, you'll find a lot of use cases to say why UX, why user research really help the business to grow and actually help the companies to save money. But just like it's the philosophy. So by being a UX designer, you just blindly believe that's the right way to build a product. You believe it's not by genius, it's actually by a process. It's by following the right process, involving the right people, and that's the way you can build better products. And also there are like a lot of cases to try to prove that it also brings real benefits for companies and teams and products. And another part is, I like to say like, we really need answers. It's just like, as a designer, when you're building a product, you just have a lot of questions and you don't know how you can build certain things in certain ways. So you are later seeking for answers in every stage. That's why I just want to talk a little bit more about like, it's like a refreshment for the whole user experience design. And actually we are seeking for answers in every part of user experience design. And that's where research comes in. So this is my favorite model about the scope of user experience. It's a very, it's the 5 elements of user experience. It's quite fundamental in, and quite old and fundamental in the user experience design field. So basically it just maps out when we say user experience design, what it really covers, what's in the scope, what's out of the scope. It kind of give you a good overview about like how many layers it has. So whenever people are saying it's just about look and feel, and you can argue no, it's look and feel is just a surface. That's what we say. Like here is it matches basically the process or the roles for to cover like each layer. So when we are talking about look and feel, it's only the top layer, that's the surface, but everything comes from the bottom. Like we first need to know the product strategy. By product strategy, how can we know like what kind of product we should build, what problem we want to solve? So we have questions, we need to know the user needs, we need to know what's the problem in the market. So how do we know that? We can conduct field research, we can conduct survey, we can try to figure out what are the challenges in the market that might be a good problem for us to build product to solve. And we might also go into the next part and we start thinking about, okay, so what are the features we should provide in order to solve that problem? Then there's a second layer, the scope part. At this stage, you can conduct competitor analysis. So it depends on, okay, what's already available in the market? You can go look at what's already solved, what are the solutions that are available. So you're not repeating what others are already doing. So you're not saying, okay, I'm building another WhatsApp from scratch and well, just doing the exact same thing, right? You might also try to differentiate your user group and think about what would be the best user group you can target on. And you might also start thinking about technology perspective. So what are the available solutions will be the best way to solve certain problems. So then you decide, okay, what are the features I want to build in order to solve that problem? Then you go into a deeper layer. So I already know these are the 5 features I want to build. And then, so for each feature, how many screens does it include? In order to, for example, have a user to register for my app, how many steps does it include? How many screens do I need? And how are they connected to each other? So that's the structure part. That's typically what we call information architecture or interaction design. So for that, and you need to know, okay, so for all these features, how do user group them? That's a typical research method we call card sorting. So like I have these 10 ideas, I have these 10 functions. So what are the features or what are the screens users see better connected, closer connected, and they should belong to one group, because basically if you look at any navigation, then they have a first layer, it has a second layer, you click on something, you see more details. So what are the things that should be grouped together? What are the things that should belong to another part? So you're looking for answers to understand the organization, how the different features, how the different screens, how the different functions that are connected to each other or different from each other. So for that part, you might do card sorting, or you have a basic idea already, and then you want to test it out to say, okay, do users understand it the same way as me? For example, I have a navigation and named it fruit, vegetable. Do users really think tomato belongs to a vegetable? Things like that. So you have an idea and you want to test it out. Do users understand it the same way as you? So that's we might run interview, we might run something called usability testing to understand, for example, if everything is clear, if users know where to click, if they know what they are saying on the screen, if there's any confusion. So you look for answers to try to explore users' mental model, like card sorting, and you also test out what you already have and to see if they really understand what they're doing. And then you go to even more details. So for each of the square here, it becomes a real screen. And you start thinking about how to put the layout, and you start thinking about what are the copies, what are the content you want to put there. And then finally, you go into the surface. So for every part, and you might also want to explore what would be the preference of the look and feel, what would be the branding direction? Do your users want to have something like looks more very trustful, it looks really something very fancy, high end, or they want something they feel like it's very accessible and they don't feel scared of interacting with? So you're also exploring your brand personality, what kind of look and feel, what kind of feelings you want to give to your users. So for all of these, basically you have, as a designer, as a UX designer, when you are working on a product, you actually go through all these phases and you have some questions in each stage. You want to know what problem I should solve. I want to know what are the features that we can provide in order to solve that problem. I want to know how I can structure the screens together and to actually make these features possible. I want to see what to put on each screen. I want to see how it should look. So you have some questions, you don't know the answers. And that's when all different research method comes in to help you to be more confident about what you are doing here. So I like to say, besides the philosophy, it's also just it's helping designers, it's supporting you as a designer when you're building product to basically be confident and be more specific in every step of your design. So
Guannan,
yeah.
you've mentioned a few techniques throughout this sort of process that you're talking about here. One of the things that we're trying to look at is find out what techniques work for certain people. Because obviously there's a lot out there. There's a lot going on. If you go on LinkedIn, you'd be scared. And you talked a little bit about field research, and also you mentioned card sorting as well. What sort of do you find card sorting works very well for yourself?
No, not really. This is definitely not my favorite method. I found it, I use card sorting sometimes, but not recently anymore. It's just like, because card sorting is basically you're giving user a basket of stuffs and ask them to group them in, like throw them into different basket. And then sometimes like grouping things into basket doesn't mean that can represent your navigation. Like it just means, yes, these things have a connection, but like things can have connections in a lot of different ways. Like it's just like if you're talking about physical things, some people will group them by colors, some people will group them by functions, some people will group them by size, and it's more like it doesn't necessarily represent a good navigation in a way. So I mostly find there's a misconnection when we are taking, so card sorting is supposed to solve the navigation problem, to say, okay, it's like, for example, if you put all these, if you give users different words of different features and you ask them to group them and then give a label to that. So I think that in the ideal scenario, the label is the first level navigation. And when they click on that label, they see all the things under that label as a second level navigation. But in most cases, it doesn't work that well because users have all these weird ways to group things. They're not thinking about navigation. You're just asking to group things. You're not asking them to really think about like, it's not necessarily like it doesn't necessarily work well in the digital world. Like users don't necessarily think it doesn't, like I think for like different reasons. Sometimes it's just like the angle it is at is not that it doesn't work that well for digital device, and sometimes it's also just like I think for good navigation is also about you're thinking about it more in the interaction flow. You think, okay, so when I first come here, the first level navigation are the only words I see. So why do you come here? Do you know where to start? Not necessarily like just the most logical way of grouping things. I might put something out just because that's something no one finds. It doesn't mean that it must be a standalone item. So sometimes it's just all maybe for my business needs, I have to emphasize certain things. For example, like if it's connected to my business model, if I need to purchase something, or if I need to proceed with something, if it's related to my conversion rate, I just have to emphasize that part. So I have to take that part out as a navigation. So I just feel like navigation is way more complicated than simply grouping things. So yep. I think for that method, I mostly think it's a good way to understand how users think. Actually, they say these things connected. So you try to understand why do they say these things connected, or if it's different from how you thought about it, or different people have different opinions. It's more, I think the most important thing is to understand why they think that way. And then it's still like eventually the designer's job to really think about how I can design a navigation so everyone that comes in knows where they should start. If you're looking for certain things, I know where to go. And also like to meet your business needs as well, and all the things. So I feel like it's just a supporting method for you to understand human minds, but it's not necessarily basically the way. So I found it more useful like by just like think about the user scenario and design myself and test it out and keep looking. For example, if there are certain navigation item no one clicks, or if you give them a scenario and you test with users to say, okay, so right now you're coming and you want to buy a piano, where do you want to click? And see if they relate, if they know where they should click first, and if they find the action they want to look for eventually. I find like designing and testing it like more helpful than actually let users do the card sorting. It can be just personal and from my experience.
Good, thanks for that. And that's really important to know. Again, there's a lot of terminologies out there. I often found that card sorting helps you make a start, but it doesn't give you the context you need when you really get into the nitty gritty of the user journey. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
Okay,
but yeah, I'm talking more about methodology. Next part, actually, I know like what's like I just mentioned, I can kind of throw some words in between, but it's more like give an overview about like actually for every part of the product design, for every every step, you actually have a lot of research method that can support you to try to get the answer. But like this is actually a map about the I think that's 20 mostly used research method in user experience field. I think is from the Norman group. Nearest Norman group. So they actually collect the most common research method. I would say like in my career, I probably used 70% of them, or something like that. So, and a lot of them are not that different. It's just like fancy name, and they give a different name. For example, if it's just a survey, but if it's happening right in the event, it has a different name called intercept survey and things like that. And true intention, just like all these true intent studies. And if it's like guided, if you come into a site, if it first asks you a question and then give you a task, and then after you finish the task, it asks you again, how do you feel about it? So it's all some sort of survey and asking questions. It's just like in different cases, it's basically it counts as a separate research method. But in general, there are research methods that focus more on behavior. So we want to see what users do. And there are some research methods that focus on attitude. So what do you think? What do you want? What do you value? There are things that basically we want in-depth knowledge about. Qualitative research, there are things sometimes we want to prove something, so we need representative data to say, okay, I got a certain sample to really draw a certain conclusion, so I need more quantitative data. And there are also things in different stages. So there are things we use to explore further to try to understand what are the problem, what are the opportunities. There are also research methods we use more to evaluate how things worked. So there are different ways to basically, if you see the alt-axis here, so they put the research method in different part, and you can basically check up every research method. It's just targeting on different purpose, but in general, like we are either looking for trying to understand the problem or trying to evaluate what we did. So that's in every stage of product design and also in different ways. So for just among all of these, I would say like there are certain research methods that's absolutely used in every company and used more often. I would say like interviews, focus group, that's probably like when you are conducting like if you as a user searcher, that's definitely like a fundamentals, and or just certain surveys. These are the things. So just in general, in user research, still like qualitative research is dominating in the field. So we run much more qualitative research than quantitative. So actually we do much less survey than for example, user interview. We like to understand users as human. We need to relate to their emotions and try to see who they are, what they really want, instead of really getting the data, like how 90% of people prefer having it in red than a green, things like that. So if we want to understand them as human beings, understand their problem, understand where they stand in their life, and why do they want certain things like that. So that's more like, it's still the kind of the most common research method and the most common goals for user research. But we also have like, so every research method has its advantage and disadvantage. And all of these, it comes basically with cost or how accurate the data is and these kind of things. For example, just even with interview and focus group, it's just like even if you compare them for interviews, it's mostly one-on-one. So you have in-depth time with one person. So it's great if you want to build persona, for example, if you want to really understand how this person's life is. And then you avoid, for example, participants who kind of influence each other. So it won't happen like if one person is saying, I think it's great, the other person, all the rest will follow, say, yeah, I agree. So you don't have these kind of challenges. But first, it's very time consuming. Like as a researcher, you are spending, for example, if each session is 1 hour, if you need to cover 10 people, you are spending 10 hours as well. And also, we are not always that great in answering questions. So also like sometimes we need some inspiration to answer questions. It doesn't mean like we don't know the answer. It's just like, for example, if now I ask you, what's your biggest dream? Why do you want to do UX? When was the last time you were trying to change your life? When was the last time you were trying to do something for yourself? Just like takes your time to think. You're not preparing yourself. So, and if other people start talking about their story, it inspires you. So that's so the advantage of interview is like no one influence each other. You feel like, okay, that's the genuine answer. But no influence can be a good thing, but also a bad thing. So basically don't get inspired, they are just on their own. So if you really meet a participant that's not so good at thinking about these answers, then you get stuck there. So basically you are asking open questions to say, when was the last time you're trying to do something nice for yourself and not change something you don't like? And so, maybe last week, I think I tried to cook breakfast. It's like, can you tell me more about what motivated you and how it happened? It's like, I don't know, I just got up and thought about it. So they give you really dry answers and you feel like, okay, it's really difficult to let them tell a good story, like something like with emotions. But if they have someone next to them and telling about stories, actually get them more prepared. So then that's the advantage of focus group. So with focus group, you have a group of people. So it saves your time as a researcher, like because in a lot of cases, we need to cover a certain number of participants. in order to basically say, okay, we think the results is representative, or sometimes it's even for just democratic reasons, and you have to basically have a certain coverage of participants to say, okay, their voice are heard, things like that. So if you can bring like 4 or 5 people together, you save a lot of time as a researcher. And also it fits also perfectly if you are not trying to make sure they don't influence each other, but you are looking for more a discussion. So for example, you're throwing a topic to say, okay, what have you found as the best way to actually motivate yourself when you're trying to have some behavior change? Can you tell me something about like what worked for you in the past? And then actually they can start a discussion and they help each other, inspire each other. So that's the advantage of focus group. And these are the two like mostly used research method, especially in the exploration phase. When you are trying to figure out what probably should solve and what's the most important thing, what are features we should build. And like there are also like other really interesting research method. For example, if I'm talking about diary studies, so all this, it only happens, for example, interview a focus group, it only happens in that 1 hour at that time. So, but if you want to see user experience over a period of time, and you can ask them to keep a diary, tell me everything when you are using my product. Please write down why you use it, how you felt about it, what you like, what you didn't like. So you can actually capture user experience in a period. So they all in different ways actually helping like solving specific problems. So that's why they're all very commonly used relatively. And then there's another direction, like for all this research, like interview focus group, and also like these diaries, it's still more or less on what do you think? How do you feel about it? What would you like? So how do we know? We all know there's a huge gap between what users say and what they really do. So there's also something on this end. So we want something more representative. We want a good sample to really say that I'm confident that's how my user group is. Or we want to know how they will really do that, not just what they say. They say, I like red, but no, it doesn't mean like if you design something right, they will do it. So what are they really going to do? So if you look at this end, like the top right end, then these are the research methods that basically help you to answer these questions. So if you, for example, A/B testing, you can release 2 versions, one red, one blue, and see which one you get more clicks on. For example, simple like that. You don't tell me what you prefer. I will just monitor how many people click on each. And also basically say, okay, release a feature and how many people use it. These are like, I don't want to listen to you. I just want to see the results. So these are the final result you can see. And by basically implementing product analytics, you can really analyze this data and see how what kind of impact you are making. What would be a better solution? So that's another part, like the other end of the story for user research. Yeah, so feel free to just check out this research method. They're all pretty interesting, and they all come for different reasons. So for time reason, I just want to talk a bit more about interview techniques, because if you have to pick one that's still the most commonly used one, I would say like as a user researcher, the fundamental ones where you have to be a master, you have to be very comfortable about is interview, focus group, and usability testing. These are the most basic things. You have to know how to write questions for that. You have to know how to ask questions. You have to know how to write reports for that. Basically, these 3 things, I think there's just like, if you want to call yourself user designer, UX designer, or UX researcher, these are the things you have to be very familiar with. So, okay, let's talk a bit about interview techniques. I think most of them are like common sense. So there are just a few like I think quite interesting things, or like the common mistakes I always see in my students, or like even in the researchers I work with. So I think one thing I want to mention, like I wrote on the bottom here, is like users really don't know what they want. So user research doesn't mean you can just throw your problem to your users. For example, you cannot ask them the questions like you cannot ask them to design your product, basically. So don't turn your problem into your user's problem. If you don't know how to design your product, they don't know either. So that's that's one part, and another part is like it sounds a bit it's not so intuitive when first hear that, but in a lot of cases we also don't know our problem, so we need to be guided, we need to be helped. It's like we spend our whole life trying to understand ourselves, so don't even expect your users to know their problem end to end. You need to prepare them, you need to warm them up, you need to have a discussion with them, you need to get them in the zone in order to get them to give you more genuine answers. So in a lot of cases, it's not they are lying. Of course, you need to avoid having them lying. If you ask leading questions, if you have your emotions there, they might have a motivation to lie. But even if they don't have motivation to lie, they might not give you genuine answers. It's just because they haven't thought about that. If you're asking about, okay, if I'm giving you a language learning app, what do you think are the most important things? If you really force them, if it's a one-on-one interview, they have to make up something for you. But they just never thought about learning a language or never thought about using an app to learn a language. So they will come up with something on the spot. And they might change their answer if you ask them again in a couple of days. It's just because they didn't think about that question. They never really, that's just, you didn't prepare them, or you asked the wrong question to the people. So that's I think these are some foundations for a lot of these techniques we actually talk about. So don't expect your users to this. They are not a machine. They are not a computer. You're just typing an answer. You're typing a question. They come up with the answer. No. So you need to ask the right question to them, and by the right question, and you need to warm them up. So that's why I was saying, okay, we asked open-ended questions. So that's basically we're saying let's warm them up. Let's ask them something they're comfortable with, and we go deeper step by step. So for example, if you're really designing a language learning app, then you might start from, could you please tell me something about last time you were trying to learn a new language? So don't ask them about, can you tell me the top 3 most important things you think you care about for a language learning app? So you start from something like they can comfortably say about, like they can comfortably talk about. So when was the last time you were trying to learn language? Say, that's 2 years ago. Say, what happened that time? What motivated you? Can you tell me the story? So you slowly try to help them to retrieve the memory and talk about their story. And then you start talking about, okay, so how was your experience at the time? You try to understand their motivation to say, oh, so how did you learn the language? Did you go to a class or did you learn online? How did you find about these different ways, these different channels you tried? What did you like? What didn't you like? Did you find any challenges? You find certain things really difficult? So you ask them the questions you ask a very open question. Tell me something about when was the last time you were trying to learn language? You start from there, you ask them to tell you the story, and you follow up, depends on what they answer. But what you need to know is their motivation. What can motivate someone to learn language? What are the most important things? So when they're talking about the different method to try, what they like, what didn't like, you already got a lot of ideas about what they cared about the most and what are the most important challenges. For example, they might say, I decided to go to class, but it was really expensive. And also, it's really far and I have kids and it's really hard for me to balance the time. So you realize, okay, a possible challenge is to balance the time because they might learn a language while they have a full-time job or when they have a family. So that's one of the important concerns. So you get these conclusions from their story. You know what are the points you want to get, but you don't just ask them to fill in these questions because we're not prepared to answer these. You have to guide them to prepare their brain and warm them up to tell about their stories. So that's about, that's the most common techniques and we do. And also if you see someone really asking all direct questions, like basically what you really want to know, like you have your goal, but you package your goal into the right way to ask users. So that's also very common mistake. We say from beginners, when you see people asking questions like, tell me the top 3 things you want for language learning app, okay, that person was not trained to do these things. And don't ask leading questions. We all know that it's extremely difficult if you are testing for your own product. It's just really hard to, you already have opinion, you're just trying to validate that. It's just human nature. But just I think it's just mindset change. So you are looking for surprise. That's surprises are the most valuable things. So the things that's different from what you thought, that's the most valuable things you can get from research. So I think it's more like adjusting your mindset and be open about what might come up from there. And another part is like we do prepare scripts. So I put a screenshot on the side. So that's one of the recent interview guideline I prepared for my product. So we do prepare very detailed guideline about like the exact question you want to ask, the exact points you want to get. But it doesn't mean you're really going to ask them one by one. So it's more about, what are the points what are the questions you need to get answers for. For example, you need to understand their motivation, their frustration, what are the methods they tried and what they liked and what they didn't like about that. So you know what you want to get out of that. And, but you change your sequence, you follow their thinking flow. Again, it comes back to like human beings are not machine. They're not prepared to answer a question. So if you follow their thinking flow, it's more likely you get genuine answer and they're more talkative. They actually, because they are already thinking about that, so they have a story in their mind they want to tell you. And if you are following your own thinking flow and they're not ready for the next question you are asking, then we'll give you really dry answers. So say, yeah, I think it was all good. Saying, oh, so how did you feel about the methods you use to learn that language? You say, they went well, they are good. I say, okay, so how do I continue this conversation, right? So to avoid this kind of situation, try to follow their thinking flow. Well, then it comes back to steer the conversation back on track. So sometimes when you're following their minds, their flow, and you lose track, you get out of script, you don't know what they're saying. But so as a researcher, like you need to be someone like people like to talk to, they're comfortable sharing their opinions about. But it's also very important that you always know what are the things you want to talk, like you care, and you have to get answers for. So you always need to know if you are off script, if you're off track, and when you need to, how you can guide them back like naturally. So yeah, the last thing I want to mention is like, so know your goals, know why you ask these questions. So for every question you write on your script, think about why it helps with your design or how it helps with your product. You know what you are trying to get out of that. So that will be very helpful for your report writing. So you don't want to be overwhelmed by the amount of data you get and you don't know what to summarize. So if you should have a goal in the beginning, so you know you're just looking for answers for that. For example, challenges for language learning. You know you want to get answers for that. So for the 10 people you talk to, you are just like navigating around that. And then when you're writing a report, you know this is one of the questions you want to get from your research. So you have one slide writing the top 10 questions, the top 10 challenges. That's basically know why you ask certain questions. You're not just chatting with your users. And
just thank you for what you've just discussed there in terms of all your techniques and that sort of thing. Have you ever been in a position when you've been interviewing someone when it's just been yourself, or have you always had someone sort of on standby and doing notes as well along as you go along?
Yeah, it's definitely recommended to have at least one moderator, one observer. So in this way, it's much easier for you to do these guidelines. Like for example, be present, actually have a conversation with users instead of like really following a guideline. It'll be much more helpful. Like if you can focus on running the conversation, and the observer can take notes and also help you to check, for example, if you are missing any questions. So no, mostly like that's how we divide. So in the ideal scenario, that's how we divide the job. So the moderator will always ask the questions, but in the end, you will basically observer will also add questions. So basically the observer keeps checking the research, the interview guide as well for you to say if you missed any questions that should be asked, or if any of the answers they think you haven't got to the bottom of the things. And they can basically ask further. So that's definitely the most healthy way of doing that, but it's not always the case. So I think the most common way, if you are really on your own, is to record your session. So in this way, basically you have this, you don't have to be that worried about that. And yeah, so I still take notes as well. Like especially if I'm on my own, I still take notes while interviewing people. but it's more, it's not that much about trying to keep everything. It's more about, it helps me to refer back, because sometimes you are going to another session and something that might help you with your conversation later. So I just want to take some quick notes to say, okay, later we're coming back to this, or actually this person already mentioned certain things in certain sections. So it's just like in case I forgot it or something. So it just helps me to organize my thoughts a bit. So that's the focus. It's a bit too ambitious to try to aim for getting a notes done while also moderating the session, unless it's really a casual session. For example, you're interviewing internal people, so it's okay. Like, for example, you are writing notes and sometimes there's a pause or something. I really hate going through recordings afterwards, definitely. That's a pain for everyone. So if it's a casual session, I would definitely try to basically finish my notes in a session, but depends on what's your priority.
Great, thanks for that.
Okay, so and there's a small recommendation about a general structure that I found quite useful in research. So basically, when you are preparing an interview guide, I mostly prepare in this way, like having 4 sections. So introduction, introduce, if you see the screenshot on the right, it's also introduce who you are, and then you emphasize there's no right or wrong answer. I'm not here to question you. I'm here to learn about you. The most honest answers, your honest answers are most useful and most helpful for me. All these things. So, and then we start a warm-up session. So warm-up session is mostly things that are related to your research goal, but not so directly. So for example, if you are still going back to the language learning app, if you're saying you're designing something like that, you start from, what language do you speak? When did you learn these languages? So you talk about topics related, and but it's very light. It helps them to get into the zone and actually think about, okay, the languages, learning about languages, things like that, just to prepare their brain, and also learning about their experience around the topic you want to talk about. And then for the main, then you will go into the main discussion. So mostly you have like, so here is the example for a 1-hour session. So you have a couple of big questions. For example, these are the things you need to get answers for to directly support your product. For example, I want to say one topic is I want to know the most important things when for users when they are learning they use the product to learn language. So for example, that's a goal I need to figure out. And then so I might plan my questions around and say, okay, so I want to understand, okay, so tell me, like, I want to understand their experience learning language in the past and what they found the most helpful, for example. So I'll plan some questions around it. That might be one section. I want to know there's like, who are my competitors? For example, even if I'm designing an app, it might be I have other apps that does something similar. It might be even other channels, for example, offline class and things like that. So for this, I want to understand what they use and their experience around my competitors. So that might be another section. So mostly for each section, it will take like 10, 15 minutes. So you mostly, if you have 40 minutes, it means you can have like 2 to 5 big sections. You want to get to the bottom thing. So you know, like, what are the big questions you want to understand. And then in the end, you go to a closure. So one of my favorite way to close a session, like at the end, is to basically have a small brainstorming. So we said users are not really good at giving you solutions. They don't know what they want. So we don't ask users for their wish list like as a main session, but we can ask them in the end. So after all this preparation, after all discussion, say, okay, so now if I'm designing a language learning app, how do you want it to be? Do you have any wish list? Do you think there are any ideas that can be cool to have, like all your wish to be available in the market? So we can have a small brainstorming with them and talk about their wish list, what they really want for their product. So now I keep it to the very end, just because for most users, not really good at doing this kind of imagining what would be helpful. That's still more a designer job than a user job. Users still, like, the main discussion is always around users' current experience, all the products they use, and what they found useful, what they found discouraging, things like that. the main thing, but still it doesn't hurt anything to have a brainstorming with them, and some of them might give you inspiration. So that's a typical structure I normally use when preparing interview session. Okay. So these are some techniques, and just for the time, I just want to talk more about the interview session. And the last part, I want to talk about the other deliverables. So you conduct all this research and you have to basically communicate in a certain way. So I'll talk about two most common deliverables we have. The first thing is user persona. So that's the fundamental for every product. You have to know who you're designing for. So who they are, what are the goals, what kind of human beings they are, why they want to use your product. Things like that. So you'll find a lot of user persona templates online. It mostly covers like these goals and needs, motivation, frustrations, their everyday life, and also how familiar they are with technology product. Also like some of the codes you want to include to make them like more relatable. So this is one of the things that every product has to have like in the very beginning. So you have to know who you are designing for, what kind of problem you're trying to solve, and how you see your product fit into their life. So a common way for of doing persona is you interview so if you know these are the session, these are the things you need to include in your persona, you need to design questions around to figure out what are their goals. For example, here is about vacation planning. This is an example about vacation planning. So you have to basic design questions to understand what are people's goals, needs, motivation, frustrations around vacation planning. You design questions to try to figure out the content of each section. And then after you conduct interviews and you try to look for patterns, for example, if you are interviewing 10 people, you feel like, okay, actually, I see, I can group these people in, let's say like 2 types. So one type like vacation for quality time, for example. They just basically, they go on vacation in order to spend quality time with their friends or family. So they don't really care about, for example, things around them that much. They just want to make sure they can, they have the right context. They're not in any drama. They can focus on being with their loved ones, for example. Another type of people who take it more educational. So they go on vacation to see things, to have more new experience. For example, I might see this kind of grouping. And then you start seeing patterns, and then you divide them to say, okay, from the research, it seems I have 2 types of target users. And I need to, then you start to put the data around, like group them into 2, and then you start looking into, okay, so what are the common goals and needs? And then you put your findings together and you use fictional users to summarize your findings. So for example, normally when they go on vacation, they focus on, they need to make sure their family are safe and comfortable there. They need to feel like they can enjoy a good time with their family, things like that. So you put their goals together from the samples you found that belong to this group. There are more scientific ways to do that. Sometimes we're doing that for our feelings. So you already have roughly, okay, it's clearly there are 2 types of people. And sometimes you do it slightly more scientific. For example, you might look for the key factors that can differentiate users. For example, their motivation, their channels of research, their budget, their size of family. If you find certain things, certain factors, they play a key role in making them a different type of user for your product. They can be a different type of user for a product because they use your product differently, or they need different features from your product. So there are different reasons that makes them a different type of user. So you identify the key factors, and then you group them differently. So for example, for the motivation part, there are 3 type of answers. For the budget part, there are 3 type of answers. And for the size of, for example, who they normally go on vacation with, there are 2 types of answers. So you list out all the options in the key factors, and you try to connect the dots to say, okay, a typical type user is like they choose answer A in this factor, answer B in the second factor, answer C in the third factor, and you connect them to make the reasonable human being. So in this way, you can also prove it's quite useful if you are trying to be a little more convincing, especially when you're presenting to other people, to say, okay, why like the personas I'm putting here, they can represent our entire user group. They're saying, okay, you know, for these factors, we have these type of people. And then I'm trying to connect lines in different ways to cover all the possibilities. So by talking about these three personas, we can roughly say we are covering 80% of the needs of our users. So that's why sometimes we follow this process. So it's just like basically giving you evidence to say, okay, I'm doing something that can be trusted. Yeah, so then you can use this to basically think about what they need from your product. So this is definitely the most commonly used method. And of course, there are a lot more, like, for example, talk about how they interact with how their day-to-day life are, and also how they interact with your product. When we have something called customer journey map, it's also really commonly used. But if you have to pick one, I would definitely say persona. And it's important because it has this position in the field because it builds empathy. So not everyone has a privilege to talk to users like you. For example, developers, they might never saw a real user. And also for people like in a lot of departments, they might never have the time, or they just never have exposure to your users. So by having a story written like that, you are helping them to understand who they are building the product for. It also helps you to develop focus. You know, okay, for example, sometimes we decide, okay, this is our primary user. I know the other cases exist, but you consciously decide this is your primary user. So if there's a conflict, I'm going to make this user happy. So, and you avoid the questions like, okay, but what if they don't do their goals? It's like that. You can say, okay, yes, that type of user exists, but we already decided that's our secondary persona, for example. And yeah, it just helps especially for different people to go communicate. So you're not talking about if this feature is useful. You actually go back to the persona to say, okay, I think this feature is important because for Janet, when she's planning for a vacation, she needs to have an easy filter to find the kids-friendly destination. So this is a very useful feature. So you can go back to explain why. To who this is important. So it helps to create, instead of like you debating with, for example, a marketing person to say, okay, I think it's important. I think this kids-friendly should be a top filter on inside our drop-down. And that's something I don't think it helps. Why is it important? So instead of you two and thinking, if you don't talk about persona, you tend to use your own personal experience to say if that's important. So by having this person written here, it helps to really explain why. And so you're not just debating with each other. Yeah, so make and define your decisions. And also like sometimes like before you test with any real user, just like when you design something or when you design a flow, just simply use your persona to check again if you are making your persona happy. So, and just surprisingly, you actually find a lot of mistakes already, even just over there. When you're just like thinking back, because you get lost in the product design process, you start thinking designer features you think are important, or like you overwhelm users with all the different possibilities. You just want to put everything there. And sometimes you just get lost and you want to make everything available. So by just thinking about your persona, using your persona to evaluate again to say, okay, so when I finished my designing, so when Janet comes to my site, where will she go first? What will she say? Where will she click? And is she having a smooth path to finish her task? So that's already solving a lot of problem like every designers make. Okay, so, and then another is like some for common reports we write if you are conducting any kind of research. So there's only one small trick I want to share is like plan your notes taking in advance. So this is a commonly used notes taking form I use. So for every question you need to figure out, so put them in Excel. And this is every participant you have. So for every participant, what's their answer to this question? Right out of here. Sorry, I made it small on purpose, just not to share the data, but the point is you have the questions on the horizontal line. So for example, motivation, frustration, products use, and you have every participant on the vertical part. So like interview FREEA's answer to frustration is this. So while you are, so share this with your observer so they can start filling this form. So you have a complete raw data finished when your interview is finished. And in this way, when you start writing report, you can take all the answers from the frustration part and then just summarize it into a slide, things like that. So it's also very easy for you to check data. And if anyone questions where you get this conclusion, you can always go back to say, okay, 6 out of 10 people, they answer this. That's why I think in general, our users found this. So it really helps a lot. If you don't have this and they start taking notes in a Word document, that's what I say all the time. So people start writing notes in Word. It's just horrible when you start trying to analyze your notes. You don't know where to start. You have 10 Word document to look at. So yeah, that's a small trick. It helps with your process and also summarize it. Okay, so this is the main knowledge part I want to share. I do have small slides about some most commonly asked questions I receive from most of my students or the researchers I work with. But we can start from first if you guys have any questions.
Still gone very quiet.
I was going to say I've got quite a few, but I'd rather wait to see if they're answered first.
I can also share the questions I normally ask. I normally got asked, but yeah, if you guys already have something in mind, feel free to ask now.
I'm just wondering if you can perhaps get some kind of slides at a later date for these, because there's a lot of information in it and it's all going in. But
we have got the video, Dave, so we'll have that recorded and posted.
Yeah, I mean, this last one is interesting. The reporting, the Excel document. I've never seen that before. I understand why you're doing it, but I'd like to see that in more detail. I understand you can't share the data, but some kind of template, perhaps, just to kind of.
I've got a couple of things I can share with you, David, if you want, actually, in terms of how to put something together that we've worked on before. So we can cover that off, not a problem.
Brilliant. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's after Giles stopped recording. I can also share a real example, things like that. It's really not fancy. It's just having the notion. It's more like like you put them. You have a structure, so you have the questions. I request basically for your interview guide. For every question, you write it on the on top, in the horizontally, and for every participants, you put a participant's name on the vertical part, so you can document every person's answer to every question in this way. So later you can summarize. Okay, so my users think about this question in the 3 different ways. So you can easily find your answers. They are all documented. I just because normally even for researchers, I say when it first got started, I say just starting, they open a Word document, or they just start writing answers to the questions in the interview guide. It's just horrible when you start analyzing the data, and how do you really think about, so you want to summarize what are the most common frustrations from my users. How do you do that? You go through the 10 Word document, and then you already forgot something and you start writing it down. So it's just a horrible experience. And also later when people are really asking, so for example, when you're reporting, when you're presenting the findings, they might ask, okay, where did you get this data? What did the user really say? You can really go back to say, okay, Linda said she her biggest frustration are this and this, and the same opinions were shared by another 2 people. So you can really go back and point out where you got that information.
Do you record the verbatims in full, or do you just take snippets of what the participant said to you when you're recording?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it mostly I just summarize it, but okay. But I do write some really interesting codes. I feel okay, if the codes of the participants actually have a personality in that. So if you look at the persona, there are always a code session. We summarize these kind of answers, and then we always have a place to write the original words from the participant, because it gives us it creates empathy. We feel we can relate to this person more. We feel the personality, the emotion behind it. So I do pick a few things I feel okay, that's really well said, or it really has a strong personality in that. I do record that, but it's mostly just used for this, or if I just for For example, if I'm summarizing frustration in the slide, I might have the user codes like somewhere on the bottom, like I pick 1 or 2, but I summarize what really happened. That's also when I took notes. I think the most important thing is like capturing things you need to summarize. But if there's some sentence you feel like it gives you a very a strong impression to your audience to understand like why they get frustrated, for example, then I also document that part and add it to the presentation.
Yeah, so for reporting, for example, say you got 6 out of 10 said this.
Yeah.
Is it more for like, because I don't know, like when going from one experience that I had qualitative data, and then I converted it to quantitative data by coding the data, and then I used that to then like through thematic analysis was then able to kind of like visualize, like basically data visualization. So is that what you do with the reporting as well then?
Yes, I do that, but honestly, like I feel like any questions about, so okay, if people really want to question how valid, how much they can trust your research data, actually that's just impossible to answer. Like I also do that, like to say 6 out of 10 people answer that, but if they really want to, it's qualitative research, it's user research. If people really want to question that, I feel like it's impossible to say, okay, I can guarantee it represents the opinions of my user group. That's why, like in the very beginning, when I talk about user search at the purpose part, I said, okay, this starts from it's a philosophy. You believe that's the way to build product. You can also believe, good product comes from genius. You have to be just Steve Jobs, for example, to build products, and you don't need user research. You can also believe in that. So I think it's more like, okay, do you? It's a little bit like more philosophy. Of course, we can try to make it more representative. Actually, that's also like a question like you get asked quite often, like in companies. So there are some techniques you can make it more representative, but I feel like it's never, if they really want to question, it's never going to be possible. You just cannot interview every person. But for example, there are certain things we can do in companies. So one thing is user screening. So because for qualitative research, you can only talk to very limited number of people. So who you talk to matters. You don't just go out and talk to like 10 random people. If you say, okay, I'm going to talk to 10 people, you actually, so start from identifying the key factors that might influence what type of users they are for your product. For example, if you decide, okay, family situation, salary, for example, we're talking about vacation planning, like the persona example, then you start from like trying to think, okay, you might talk to your marketing team, you might talk to like people who have experience in that, and you identify these factors together. For example, family situation, if they have kids, their income, also where they live. For example, you identify certain things that might influence their answers to your questions dramatically. You identify this and you decide what kind of users you want to talk to. So it said, okay, I'm going to talk for my participants. I require half of them to be single, half to be, okay, let's say, okay, 1/3 to be single, 1/3 to be a couple without kids, and the last 1/3 to be a family with kids, for example, to try to get opinions from each user group. So you actually actively decide what kind of user you want to talk to. So that's very commonly used thing to actually make your research more representative. And also like you can work with like quantitative research, for example, running a survey before or running a survey after. If you run a survey before, you try to identify, a survey helps you to identify these factors. So for example, if you're asking them, what's your family income? What are the most important things when you look for vacation, all these things, you can already group the answers. And then you interview the different groups. Mm-hmm. So you know you are taking it from different samples, right? Or you already have some, or you can run an interview first and you find certain patterns. You think you have 2 different groups, and then you run a survey to validate that, to say, okay, is it true that these are the 2 groups I normally like for my products? Or you might have product analytics. You already know the usage pattern of your users for the product, and you take users from each usage pattern. For example, how frequent they use, let's say if I'm really building a holiday booking engine or something like that, and I look at the usage data to see, like, for example, how much time they spend on my product, what are the filters they apply, and you look for different patterns, and then you interview people from each group to understand why. So these are the things that can make your user search a bit like more valid. But I would say like I don't think that's a job of user research to really make sure you cover the entire population and then your data can be completely trusted. I just don't feel that's a job of that. Like, so if people really don't believe in that, they really need you to justify everything you do to say, okay, you need to make sure, you need to basically say it covers everything. It's for sure can be trusted. I don't even think that's possible.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that I've read online, probably around like things that I've consumed, is all about making sure you have a justified, you justify kind of everything you do, especially as juniors, because it's like when you come to present it, and then you're kind of questioned on your approach or your thinking process, and you're kind of like, well, I just did it. Like if unless you have the backing for it, or you've got maybe some kind of credentials to be like, I've done this for a long time, I've done research before, so you're kind of used to it. If you're not, and you're kind of pulled up on it, and you're asked to then explain something, and you can't because then you didn't go through that justification process yourself, then it's like you kind of get a bit stuck. And I also think that it helps to maybe cluster themes to try and find patterns in the data, so that you can kind of maybe make maybe trust your gut a bit more, like, because you haven't really done as much product design in the like ever, like we're all coming into it new, so it just, I think, helps to maybe guide our ideas maybe. So yeah, just wanted to ask about.
Definitely.
Cheers, Jeremy. Good question. Okay, so I'm mindful of it's 11:10 at your time there, Guannan. You're going to need some sleep soon, so let's see how we get on.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
You can push on to the next slide if you like, if there's some more stuff to go through. So I'm inside.
Yeah, just some quick questions I have. So basically, I get asked a lot, especially because my students have to go through the entire user experience design process in their course. So I think most people, after they spend 5 minutes going through the process, and they mostly ask, do you really do it all the time in the companies? Do you really run user research in this way? Like start from interview and go test out your product and test it again, all things. So, so I think my answer would be like, we always do it in at different levels. So it's not like we always stick to the same process. For example, we have to interview 10 people in order to get started, or we have to test with certain people in order to basically before we release. It's not like that, but it's more like also as a designer, you kind of know how much you know, how much you don't know. For example, if you're designing a function you're quite familiar with, or you already run some research before, or you're just doing something like you are already a user for, then yeah, you can interview less people. So you know, like if you are comfortable enough to get started, you understand the problem. And also it's more like it's always better to just run testing, but the minimum of tests, minimum feedback you can get is just like what we said here, use your persona and think about how your persona would use your product. That's the minimum level review you could do. Just say, okay, and then you'll be shocked and how much mistakes you'll notice. Like after even you just run this, you realize how much you overwhelm the user. For example, by adding 10 features, you actually make the job of Janet really difficult already. So you realize, okay, it's just really difficult. So that's a minimum of feedback, and you can really you can do. And of course, it's always nice to just even get some internal people, take someone from marketing, take someone from content, like people who don't work with your product a lot. And just have them basically test out and just see how they feel about it. It's just like, of course, the more the better. But I would say like we always run it, we always follow this mindset, but just like we adapt to the different situation, more or less like that. So, and I think another part would be like, I also got asked a lot, is like they feel like, okay, user research must be something like for really big companies because it sounds luxury. And again, it's quite connected to the previous question. Like you can run research in different ways. It's also research. You just go online and check what are the competitors over there. Or it's also research. You just sit with the colleagues and just talk to colleagues who don't work with the product directly. So you can run research in different ways. And it's definitely not luxury if you actually need these answers to build your product. So for a lot of things, it really just helps, and it helps you get started. So obviously just be adaptive, and if research becomes a mindset for yourself, you always know like how to adapt to the situation and get the most out of that. Yeah, so, and then—
Can I ask the
yeah.
question about your previous slide, the one
Yeah.
before, sorry.
This one? Yeah.
Yeah. So when you said ask people within the business as well.
Yeah.
Doesn't that provide its own problems with like biases and political agendas that they want to put across in the product?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's not the ideal scenario. So it's more like the best you can get, for example. So the most biased one are the people who work directly on the product. So the people who design the product, the people who program the products, and sometimes like even the programmer, they're okay, like depends on what features you're testing, or the product manager. So you have been discussing why we build in certain ways for so many times. So you cannot test with these people. So it's mostly the furthest. For example, I work for an education technology company. So sometimes in order to test features, we have a content department. We go to these basic writers or teachers. So they're not so familiar with technology. They also don't know what features we are designing, we are building. So we just go up and talk to them. So if you cannot find, for example, you work for a startup, you don't have the budget to run user research, or just like you have a tight schedule, you don't have that, just like you don't have that time to run all of these. So it's more like it's better to, that's the best you can get. So get some people who are not quite familiar, who don't have the, like, who don't think like an expert, like product designing or building expert. Some people who think more like average users, normal human beings. They're not quite familiar, that they didn't join the conversation about why you did certain things, so they're not already influenced. So if you already explain why I build things in this way, and they feel, okay, it makes a lot of sense. So just basically find the best resources you can get.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, so the last thing I'm going to talk about is all these questions are quite connected. It's just like, it's mostly people feel it's quite luxury. It's not like something every company would do. So obviously, like what I like to say to myself is like good UX research is basic good research is good design. So when you conduct research, you should always have your goal in mind, and the goals should always lie on it helps to build better products. That's how you can make UX research less luxury. I'm not trying to write a fancy paper or report. I'm trying to make my product better. So if you think back in the very beginning when I talk about all the different layers product design, so you have a lot of questions you need to answer in order to build it. So for every research, it should fit back to helping you to design every layer of product better. So you shouldn't have a question, like you should be able to answer why you put any question in your guide to say how it helps with your product design. That's also like what I found the most helpful for my research skill is keep like really connecting research to design. So when I design, I have questions I want to figure out. I feel like if I know this, I will make better or more informed decision. Or when I do research, I think about how this question might potentially help in my design. So like always think from two directions and think about how to connect your research to design. That's a way to make your research more grounded, make your research less luxury, and make it a necessity for any product you build. And be flexible. So it's not like you are trying to publish a scientific paper, so you have to make sure you have certain data. It has to be the real user or anything. You are trying to solve a problem. So be willing to compromise and get the most out of the resource you can get. Okay, that's it.
Wow, thank you very much, Guannan. I'm sure I echo everyone's sentiments when I say that was an exhaustive, in a good way, presentation that gave us a lot of information for to digest. And I think the time as well it is at your end and the effort you put into that presentation, I think we're all incredibly grateful for it. So thank you very much for your time. It's much appreciated. I'm just going to stop
about time
now.
Yeah.
First time doing this, so bear with me a second. Recording.